Here we are at a wonderful series of impoundments made by beavers, legendary dam builders. See here their small dam here in the narrows of the center pond brook, and made up of sticks and mud. Temporarily builds up a bit of a pool behind it for them to live. Helps them have an escape route. They're not very good at running on land, and then, of course, we've got lots of habitat for frogs and fish and crayfish and many other animals here. But right now, we see that this dam isn't really functioning, and we get a great opportunity here to see another important function that beaver dams play in river ecology and in watershed ecology. And if we look at the upper part of the dam, the upstream part of the dam, we're seeing so many of the sediments, the collection of mud that has settled on the bottom of this section of the stream, and you might say this little pond or pondlet, and we're seeing a lot more above the dam here. So this is important. Nutrients come into the system, plants take advantage of this and grow like crazy, and then when they die, decomposers break down those nutrients, releasing them again. We want to slow this process and keep it as high as the watershed as we can, because clearly these resources and these nutrients in particular are going to make their way downstream and end up in the ocean and are essentially out of the system and no longer available to anything in the watershed. So the beaver dams, by slowing down the water, they cause the particles and the soil particles that are carrying those nutrients downstream to settle out and momentarily sit at the bottoms of these pools. When the dams break and the water is released, we get these mud flats and these large areas above the dam here that are exposed, and we will see that plants will come in here and grow like crazy, which of course is going to be food for all sorts of voles and other herbivores that are going to be eating the plants there, and of course the carnivores come behind there, and they'll be feeding on those frogs and voles and baby birds and so many of the things that would be growing on this mud flat. So this whole process here of collecting nutrients is important. If you think about it, those animals I just talked about, they're coming to visit. They are eating the herbs that are going to grow there, and then they're going to go back up on the land to their dens or to move to a different area. All those animals and foxes and bears and things that are going to eat some of that stuff, eating the sedges, eating the voles, are going to go and poop up the hill, and that's going to keep it in the upper watershed. If it makes it downstream, it just contributes to the nutrient load, and we get eutrophication where we get lots of algae blooms. Beavers are no longer living here and maintaining this dam, so we have water running through it. But very often people think that dams can get in the way of our native fish, especially brook trout, from moving up and down streams. Very often we have well-meaning citizens that come into a stream situation and they want to remove the debris and take the logs out of the rivers. These logs are providing habitat and hiding spaces for our fish that can hide underneath them, so that whether it be ospreys or kingfishers when they're small, and herons and so many other things, can't see them or can't get to them. So they provide some good protection. Meanwhile, there are all sorts of bugs that will live on this material, either in the water or just above it, which will provide food for the trout. So now we have trout living in perhaps for several generations upstream in these beaver ponds. When the dams break like this, the fish can now leave the ponds and travel downstream into some of these other pools. For a little while, we'll have this kind of isolated population of trout, which in a sense has its own native genetics. It's our only native trout in New England, in the Northeast really. And when the beavers leave and stop maintaining the dam, some good storm or perhaps spring runoff will blast the dam open a bit, and the trout will be able to even more readily be flushed downstream and swim downstream and mix with other populations of trout that may have also been isolated. So in this way, these pools are important areas as refugia for the genetics of our brook trout, our native brook trout here. Very often, too, because of the shading, many of the larger fish will come up from the largest stream, part of the stream down below, where things can really heat up during the hot July and August summer months. These are thermal refugia as well, and are critical for the trout to be able to make it through those hot periods where we might have significant droughts as well. Oh, wow! Hey, you guys, check this out. Holy cow. Gonna need the peepers for this one. But I caught wind of it before I even saw it. What do we have? It's a latrine. It's a whole bathroom area where an animal has been going to the bathroom. We're seeing different sections here where it's used it a whole bunch of times. Almost looks like shells. Look at, I got some leg parts in here. Wow, you know what that looks like? What does that look like? It kind of looks like somebody went to a mini lobster bake. So we'll have to think about mini lobsters a little bit. Let's look at some of these other ones though. So we get some orange things with legs and a bit of a shell kind of pattern. We look here, we're seeing more white fibrous material here. We still get a little orange. I'm seeing things that look like bones. You have to think here a little bit. What's going to go for a mini lobster bake, or we can think of them as crayfish, and be eating a bunch of fish, and yet we're 30 feet or 40 feet or so up in the woods, and it made quite a disturbance. These are also good size. They're large, so it's a pretty large animal. I think we've found the bathroom of an otter, which we call a latrine very often. The otter in this area pretty much does kind of a 3-week loop where it travels up a stream and it would be eating its way up, and in general they don't have much of a home unless they have babies that need to stay in some kind of burrow or hole in the ground somewhere. Otherwise, as adults, they just go up the stream, they sleep wherever at night on the banks and up in the woods, and then they may go up and over the hill, so you might even find some in the woods on their way to another stream. They'll work their way down another stream, and they just go across the landscape. After about 3 or 4 weeks, they may come back to the same area. They may stick around the area for a few days if there's good hunting there, but otherwise, I generally find about a 3-week loop is what they do in this area. So this kind of setting right here would be a really good place. If you had a game camera, this would be a great place to set it up somewhere, and good chance you'll get traffic. Not only of the otter, but other things that may have smelt this and want to come in closer to investigate what the animals are. So look for these sites. Look what we have underneath here. Here we see an example of what, at least the beginning of what invasives can be doing here. Here's a pretty good sized shrub. Kind of just a little bit, but it's a good sized little bit here of barberry in a very wild kind of natural setting here. Gives us an opportunity to look at what is it competing with here. And we're on the edge of a beaver pond. We've got high bush blueberries here on all sides. We've got a shad bush or service berries with some berries here. That could influence that, certainly could if it's younger. We got some bracken that we can barely even see under here because that's certainly being crowded out. Some spirea or that meadowsweet that we have seen before. And looks like the nanny berry. And one of the viburnums that would be putting out more berries. So here we have numerous berry bushes. Here we found at least a few of the fruits still remaining on our nanny berry. You can see that the red ones are not quite ripe, and then the dark blue ones are the ones that are ripe. We can see some locations where the berries have already fallen. This is Viburnum nudum, variety casinoides. We've got dewberry down here, which is really nice. One of the rubus, which is, related to our blackberries and raspberries and things. This is the dewberry that creeps along the ground. Another one that would love a little more light and not be under a barberry. If they lose out to this barberry, we're switching from the good berries that have been native here and the birds are used to eating to the non-native berries that they really can't take advantage of in quite the same way. And it's kind of early in the season, but we can see here the berries forming on the bottom here. Very early on, they'll get kind of a yellowish cream-colored flower. And then these kind of a coloration of red candies, you might say, that are about that size later on. Little red berries that the birds will pick up. These plants are covered with spines in between, so we have lots of little leaves coming out from these kind of little clusters along the branch. And then we have lots of little spines that are kind of like the rose thorns in here, and thus the barbs, I think, of barberry. At times when they're small, they can be somewhat easy to remove in that you can grab at the base, and there are thorns down almost all of the trunk, but sometimes the bottom 3 or 4 inches has enough space there that you can get your hand around it. Gloves are certainly encouraged. You'll then recognize these bright yellow roots, and you can take the shrub and perhaps hang it up in a branch in something where it's going to dry out, and the roots will really dry out. And if you see any straggler roots that are bright yellow, might want to take those out as well. And over time, you can effectively, if the patch isn't too bad, you can at least limit its spread quite a bit and remove the seed source. So we really got quite a few berries in general here. Here we have just, kind of just a little bit, and we're really in a nice natural setting. There isn't much of anything else. We're next to a wetland. We're in a beautiful forest. Everything is pretty natural. This would be a great place to get the volunteers of the Westfield Wild and Scenic to come in and give us a hand pulling these things, hand pulling and using some of our tools to dig these out. And with just a couple of visits here, we could set this back to a real nice natural setting.